My name is Iris Tmain, and I just turned 18. At my birthday party last night, my dad pulled me aside and spoke in a low voice. When this is over, you're going to sign some papers for Uncle Wade, he said. Just a formality. I smiled and nodded. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and transferred my entire inheritance from my grandparents into an irrevocable trust. Just in case. The next morning, my parents and my younger sister found out the truth. The cabin. The savings. The investments. Everything was protected behind a legal wall they could not touch. My dad went pale. My uncle, who had already signed a deal to sell property he never owned, called a lawyer. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like and subscribe. Tell me your city and local time below. I always love seeing where people are listening from. Now let me take you back 6 years. The summer I turned 12, my grandfather picked me up in his old truck and drove me to Cedar Lake. The cabin sat behind tall pine trees beside the water. The porch leaned a little to one side. The screen door never closed right. The whole place smelled like wood smoke, old books, and something sweet I could never name. Grab the other end, Grandpa said while lifting a fence rail. I grabbed it. We spent the morning fixing rotten fence posts. Grandpa never rushed me. He showed me how to press my thumb into the wood to test if it was weak. If the wood gives in, he said, it's done. Inside, Grandma Vivian had sandwiches and iced tea waiting on the kitchen table Grandpa built himself. That evening, we sat on the porch and watched the lake turn gold. This cabin stays in the family, Grandpa told me quietly. But family isn't always blood, Iris. Family is whoever shows up. At 12 years old, I thought he was just being poetic. He wasn't. After that, I spent almost every weekend at Cedar Lake. Grandpa taught me how to fix leaks and check the roof. Grandma taught me how to organize books by color because it made the room feel warmer. They showed me every part of that cabin like they were handing me pieces of a secret. Back home, things felt different. Our house in Ridgemont was fine. Not warm. Just fine. My younger sister Kelsey had the bigger bedroom with lavender walls and expensive furniture. My room still had old carpet from the previous owners. One night at dinner, Dad talked about the cabin. Dad's place is losing value, he said while cutting his steak. We should sell it and reinvest. Mom nodded. Makes sense. Grandpa said the cabin stays in the family, I said. Dad laughed. Not a mean laugh. A dismissive one. You were 12, Iris. He was just being nice. Then the conversation moved on to Kelsey's debate trophy. Nobody asked about the science fair I had won 2 weeks earlier. After dinner, I noticed a glossy flyer on the counter. Ridgeline Development. Lakefront lots. Premium prices. Someone had written a phone number on the side. I stared at it for a long moment. Someone was already looking at my grandparents' home and seeing money. 2 years later, Grandpa Harold died. I was 14. At the funeral, I saw Dad and Uncle Wade standing near the dessert table. Wade had a folder under his arm. We should move on this before probate gets complicated, he whispered. They were talking about the cabin. At Grandpa's funeral. I stayed quiet. I was only 14. I had no idea Grandpa had already planned for this exact moment. 2 years passed. Grandma Vivian got sick in March and died in June. The last time I visited her, she held my hand tightly. The cabin is yours, Iris, she whispered. Don't let them take it. I promise. She squeezed my hand once and closed her eyes. After her funeral, Dad sat at the kitchen table looking relieved. Now we can finally sort out the property, he said. That night, I heard him talking to Wade in the garage. Let's get this moving, Dad said. I stood in the hallway holding a glass of water. And suddenly I realized something terrible. Grandma's death felt like a loss to me. But to them, it felt like an opportunity. I didn't cry that night. I made a decision instead. From ages 16 to 18, the cabin became my quiet rebellion. Every Saturday, I drove to Cedar Lake in the old Honda I bought with babysitting money. I fixed torn screens. I swept pine needles off the roof. I repaired weather stripping. At home, the language started changing. The cabin stopped being Grandpa's place. Now it was the family property. Wade started visiting more often. Sometimes he brought folders. Sometimes he brought real estate papers. One night I finally spoke up. Grandma wanted me to keep it. Mom gently put down her fork. Your grandma was emotional near the end, she said. This is business. Business. That became their word for everything. By 17, Dad became more direct. When you turn 18, we'll settle this as a family. But the way he said family made my stomach twist. One afternoon at the cabin, I found an envelope hidden behind old quilts. My name was written on the front. Inside was a business card. Margaret Caldwell. Attorney at law. Below her name were 4 small words. Tmain Family Trust. My hand shook. Grandma had hidden this for me to find. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Margaret called me. I need to speak with you before your birthday, she said carefully. That Saturday, I met her downtown. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. She opened a folder and looked directly at me. Your grandparents created an irrevocable trust 6 years ago, she said. The cabin, savings, and investments were placed inside it. Total value, about $2.1 million. I stared at her. You are the sole beneficiary. The room felt like it tilted. The cabin was transferred into the trust years ago, she continued. Your father and uncle have no legal claim. Why didn't they tell Dad? Margaret paused. Your grandfather told me something very clear. He said his sons would sell the cabin before the funeral flowers wilted. Then she added something worse. Someone has recently been asking questions about the title. After that meeting, I started paying closer attention. One Sunday, Wade came over for dinner. Afterward, he and Dad went into the garage. I stood near the cracked door and listened. I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgeline, Wade said. $450,000. My chest tightened. How do we clean up the title? Dad asked. We file a quitclaim deed, Wade replied. Mom and Dad are gone. We're the legal heirs. What about Iris? She's 17. She can't stop anything. Then Wade laughed. We'll give her 50 grand for college. She should be grateful. I stepped away from the door with ice-cold hands. Wade had already promised to sell a cabin he didn't own. That night I texted Margaret. They're accelerating. Her reply came quickly. I expected that. The next Saturday, Margaret explained everything. The moment you turn 18, you legally become the successor beneficiary, she said. Once you sign the paperwork, I'll file a legal notice at the county office first thing in the morning. Nobody will be able to sell the property. What if they try anyway? They'll fail. I looked down at the papers. Should I tell my parents? Margaret slowly removed her glasses. Your grandfather asked me to protect you, not negotiate with them. 9 days before my birthday, Dad announced he was throwing me a party. Big celebration, he said with a smile. You only turn 18 once. I smiled back. But I knew the truth. My dad was planning my birthday. My uncle was planning to steal my cabin. And I was waiting quietly for both of them to walk into a trap my grandparents built years earlier. 5 days before my birthday, Mom sat beside me on the couch. Now that you're almost 18, she began softly, we should make some family decisions together. Together. That word felt fake. The cabin costs money, she continued. Taxes, repairs, insurance. If we sell it, we can pay debts and help both you and Kelsey. Grandma wanted me to keep it. Mom's patience slipped for just a second. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Iris. Dad walked in at the perfect moment. I already talked to a buyer, he said proudly. What company? Ridgeline something. I already knew. I'll think about it, I said. Dad smiled. That's my girl. Later that night, Kelsey came into my room. Mom and Dad keep talking about the cabin after they think I'm asleep, she whispered. They sound excited. Is something happening? I tucked the blanket around her feet. Don't worry about it. But she still looked worried. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Wade stopped me in the driveway. He smiled like a salesman. The land alone is worth $450,000, he said. You say yes, and you walk away with $50,000 cash. And you get the rest? His smile tightened. You're young, Iris. $50,000 is a lot of money. Whose name is on the deed? Your grandparents. But they're gone now. That's not how ownership works. For 1 second, his expression changed. Then he smiled again. Don't overthink this. As soon as he drove away, he called someone. I knew exactly who. The night before my birthday, I drove to the cabin alone. The lake was dark and silent. I sat on Grandpa's porch chair and opened Margaret's email. All the legal papers were ready. Everything waited for my signature. At midnight, I read every page twice. Then I closed the laptop and listened to the lake. Grandpa once told me patience wasn't weakness. It's timing, he said. I finally understood. The tears came quietly. Not because I was weak. Because I wished things were different. I wished my father cared more about fishing trips than property values. I wished my mother had asked what I wanted. I wished I didn't need legal papers to protect myself from my own family. But wishes do not win legal fights. Documents do. I went home and set my alarm for 11:45 p.m. At midnight, I would turn 18. At midnight, everything would change. 11:50 p.m. The house was silent. I joined a video call with Margaret. Ready? She asked. Ready. The clock struck midnight. I signed the acceptance papers. Just like that, I officially became the legal beneficiary of the Twain Family Trust. Margaret explained the next step. At 8 a.m., I'll file a legal notice with the county office. Once it's recorded, nobody can sell the property. I looked at the signed page in my hands. This isn't a trick, Margaret said gently. This is your grandparents' final gift. Downstairs, my family slept peacefully. They had no idea Uncle Wade's fake paperwork was already worthless. That same night, Wade printed forged documents at his apartment. He called Dad around 11:30. Everything's ready, he said. We file tomorrow morning. Dad sounded nervous. You sure this works? Simple transfer between heirs. But it wasn't simple. Wade had already signed a contract with Ridgeline Development. If he failed to provide ownership papers, he would owe them $45,000. He bet everything on property he never checked properly. And by morning, he was going to learn the truth. My birthday party started at 4 in the afternoon. The living room was full of neighbors, church friends, and relatives. There were balloons and cake and silver decorations. I smiled. I opened gifts. But inside my jacket pocket was the paper that changed everything. Dad stood near the cake and raised his glass. Iris is officially an adult today, he announced proudly. And our family has exciting plans for the future. He looked directly at me. Right, Iris? Every face turned toward me. Thanks, Dad, I said. Nothing more. Later, Nora Beckett from next door to the cabin quietly pulled me aside. I saw your uncle at the property last week, she whispered. He brought 2 men in suits and measured the land. He had already shown the property to buyers. Before he even owned it. After the cake was served, Dad stood again. Our family has struggled financially, he announced loudly. But Harold and Vivian left us something valuable. The cabin at Cedar Lake. The room became very quiet. And as a family, he continued, we've decided to sell it. We've decided. The words hit me like cold water. Dad smiled at me. Iris understands this is best for everyone. I slowly set down my fork. I never agreed to sell the cabin. Dad's smile froze. She's joking, he laughed nervously. I'm not joking. Wade stepped forward. This isn't the time for this. I looked at him calmly. You're right. The time is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Silence filled the room. Nobody understood what I meant. But Wade suddenly looked nervous. Guests started leaving soon after. Once the house emptied, Mom turned toward me angrily. Do you have any idea what your father is going through? She snapped. He could lose this house. And you're trying to sell Grandma's. We are a family, she shouted. And if you loved this family, you wouldn't need a lawyer. I froze. How do you know about a lawyer? Mom didn't answer. Instead, she admitted Wade had searched through my bag and found Margaret's business card. The room spun. They had gone through my personal things. Before I could speak, Nora stepped into the kitchen. That girl has every right to speak with a lawyer, she said firmly. Mom glared at her. This is family business. Nora didn't back down. Vivian would want Iris protected. After Nora left, Dad closed the kitchen door. The house suddenly felt small. Here's what's going to happen, Dad said slowly. Tomorrow morning we file the paperwork. The cabin sells. You get $50,000. Out of how much? Nobody answered. And if I refuse? Dad's face hardened. Then you're on your own. No help with college. No living under this roof. The words hurt more than I expected. You're threatening to kick me out? I'm asking you to be part of this family. I stood up. I am part of this family, I said quietly. I'm the part that keeps promises. Then I walked upstairs. That night, I sat on my bed holding the signed trust papers. My grandparents had known exactly what would happen. And they protected me before I even understood why I needed protection. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the county recorder's office opened. Margaret Caldwell was the first person through the door. She handed over the trust documents and filed the legal notice against the cabin property. Done. From that moment forward, anyone checking the title would see the truth. The cabin belonged to the trust. And I was the beneficiary. At 8:14, Margaret called me. It's done, she said. I sat quietly at the kitchen table eating cereal. Dad and Wade came downstairs dressed for business. We'll be back by lunch, Dad said while grabbing his keys. I looked up calmly. Good luck. At 9:05 a.m., Wade handed his quitclaim deed to the county clerk. The clerk typed the property number into her computer. Then she stopped. I can't record this document, she said. Wade blinked. Excuse me? The property is owned by the Twain Family Irrevocable Trust. It has been for 6 years. Dad stepped forward. That's impossible. The title records are clear, the clerk replied. Then she added the final blow. There's also a legal notice filed this morning. Wade's face drained of color. Dad slowly turned toward him. You said this was simple. I didn't know about the trust. You're a real estate agent. Dad shouted. How did you not check? Margaret sat quietly in the waiting area watching everything happen. She never said a word. She didn't need to. At 9:22, Dad called me. What did you do? He demanded. I accepted what Grandma and Grandpa left me. You went behind our backs with some lawyer. Dad, I said softly, the lawyer has been involved for 6 years. You just never asked. Heavy silence filled the line. This was my parents' property, he whispered. And they chose me to protect it. Another long silence. Not because they didn't love you, I said carefully. Because they didn't trust you with it. Dad hung up. A few minutes later, Ridgeline Development called me. Their lawyer sounded frustrated. We have a signed contract from Wade Tmain. He doesn't own the property, I replied. There was a pause. Then the lawyer asked quietly. Is the cabin for sale? No. That same afternoon, Margaret gave me worse news. The notary stamp on Wade's paperwork appears fake, she said. My stomach dropped. That's illegal, isn't it? Yes. My uncle hadn't just tried to steal the cabin. He had committed a crime. Dad came home around 2 in the afternoon looking exhausted. Mom had clearly been crying. Dad sat across from me at the table. The bank is after me for $180,000, he admitted quietly. The store is gone. The cabin was supposed to save us. I'm sorry about the business, I said honestly. But the cabin was never yours to sell. Mom stepped forward. Your grandparents weren't thinking clearly near the end. They created the trust 6 years before they died, I replied. Dad slammed his hand on the table. I'll contest the trust. Then Margaret's voice came through my phone speaker. I had already called her. Mr. Tmain, she said calmly, fighting this trust will cost more than the property itself. The trust is airtight. Dad stared at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw something different in his eyes. Not anger. Defeat. 2 hours later, Wade called the house. Ridgeline was suing him for damages. His voice shook. They're accusing me of fraud. Dad's answer was cold. Did you commit fraud? I thought we owned it. You're a real estate agent, Wade. You never checked? Silence. Then Wade admitted something terrible. I found a notary stamp. Dad inhaled sharply. And that's forgery. Wade whispered. I need a lawyer. So do I, Dad replied before hanging up. Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart. Ridgeline sued Wade. The county opened an investigation into the fake notary stamp. Wade's real estate license was suspended. People in town started talking. Not because I spread rumors. Because court records are public. Soon everyone knew the story. Harold Tmain's sons tried to sell his cabin. His granddaughter stopped them. Some people called me brave. Others called me cold. I didn't argue with either side. One afternoon, Wade called me. Please, he begged. Ask your lawyer to remove the legal notice. Maybe I can still fix this. The notice stays, I said. Your grandparents would be ashamed of you. I looked at Grandpa's framed photo on my desk. My grandparents are the reason the trust exists, I answered quietly. They chose this. He hung up. Dad eventually stopped fighting. He sold the building supply store at a loss and worked out a payment plan with the bank. Mom went back to work at a pharmacy. The house stayed. Barely. For 2 weeks, Dad and I barely spoke. The silence inside the house felt heavy. One evening, Kelsey called me from a friend's house. I don't understand everything, she said softly, but I'm sorry they hurt you. My throat tightened. Thanks, Kels. In late April, I drove back to the cabin. The trees beside the lake were blooming. I unlocked the door with the key Grandpa gave me years earlier. The cabin smelled exactly the same. Pine. Old books. Sun-warmed wood. I walked through every room slowly. The kitchen table Grandpa built. Grandma's colorful bookshelves. The porch where we watched sunsets. Then I found another envelope in the desk drawer. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Inside was a letter. He wrote that he loved his sons, but they never understood the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. Then came the line that broke me. I chose you because you asked if the roof needed fixing before you ever asked what the place was worth. At the bottom, he wrote, "Take care of it. It took care of you first." I sat on the porch for a long time after reading that. A week later, Margaret called again. "The legal notice can now be removed," she said. "The title is fully secure." "And Wade?" "He settled with Ridgeline by taking out a personal loan. The deal is dead." Then she added one more thing. "Your grandparents also created a separate college fund for you. $50,000. With interest, it's now over $58,000. I closed my eyes. 50,000. The same amount Dad and Wade tried to use to buy my silence. My grandparents had already planned everything. Quietly. Carefully. With love. That week, I enrolled at Ridgemont Community College. Environmental Science. Minor in Forestry. The cabin was only 20 minutes away. For the first time, I wrote the cabin's address under home address. And it finally felt true. A few days later, I asked Mom and Dad to meet me at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. Not the house. Not the cabin. Somewhere calm. They looked nervous when they arrived. After we sat down, I spoke first. "I love both of you," I said quietly. "But the cabin is not for sale. Not now. Not ever." Mom opened her mouth to argue. I stopped her gently. "You threatened to throw me out. You searched through my bag. You tried to pressure me into giving away something Grandma trusted me to protect." Dad stared into his coffee. Finally he whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it today," I said. Then I stood up. "I'll call you Sunday." It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. One Sunday in May, Kelsey came to the cabin carrying pizza. We sat on the porch watching the lake. "I didn't know about any of it," she said quietly. "I know. Was I part of the problem?" I looked at my little sister. She hadn't asked for any of this. "You were a kid, Kelsey." "We both were." She looked out at the water. "It's beautiful here. Grandma used to say that every time she sat on this porch." Kelsey smiled softly. "Can I come back sometimes?" "Anytime." We spent the afternoon talking about school and the dock and the heron standing near the shore. For the first time in a long while, things felt peaceful. Early one morning in June, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of coffee. Mist floated above Cedar Lake. The trees stood dark against the sunrise. I thought about everything that happened. I didn't win against my family. There's no victory in being hurt by people who were supposed to protect you. But I kept my promise. And for the first time in my life, I stood somewhere that truly belonged to me. Not because I fought harder. Because two people loved me enough to prepare for the future before I even saw the storm coming. My grandparents couldn't stop my father from becoming desperate. They couldn't stop Wade from chasing money. But they could make sure I had solid ground beneath my feet. I looked out at the lake turning blue in the morning light. Grandpa was right. There's a difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. And my family spent years focused on the wrong one. If you're listening to this and you feel like nobody is protecting you, remember something. Sometimes the people who love you prepare for you quietly. Sometimes they build shelter long before the storm arrives. And sometimes all you have to do is keep the promise they trusted you with. That's my story. If it made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you in the next story.